There exists a quiet forge at the center of every human soul, a place unseen by the eyes yet felt in the tremors of a heartbeat or the catch of a breath when grief enters the room. This forge is where our emotions reside, not as random chemical sparks, but as sacred elements, each waiting to be transmuted. Pain, especially, burns hot within this crucible, misunderstood by many as an affliction to be escaped, silenced, numbed. Yet beneath its searing heat lies the first principle of emotional alchemy, that pain is not the enemy, but the raw ore of power waiting to be refined. To begin understanding the alchemy of emotions is to journey inward through veils of illusion that have cloaked the deeper truth for centuries. Modern life teaches us to chase happiness as a destination, to fear discomfort, to avoid suffering as if it were a contaminant. But the mystics, philosophers, and sages have whispered otherwise, that within sorrow hides strength, and in despair lies dormant the divine fire that can illuminate our darkest paths. Emotions are not detours from our purpose. They are the very path to it. In this introduction, we draw open a metaphysical curtain and peer beyond the surface layers of psychology and self-help. The idea that emotions are signals is not new, but the deeper truth, the one rarely explored, is that emotions are ancient messengers encoded with cosmic intelligence, leading us back to wholeness if we dare to listen. Pain is a map. Anger is a lantern. Grief is a river. Joy, when it comes, is not the final reward. It is the echo of alignment, the resonance of being in right relation with truth. To feel is not weakness. It is a ceremony. And transformation begins when we stop running from our inner storms and instead learn to sit in the eye of them, still and listening. Alchemy, as once practiced by the hermeticists and visionaries of old, was never just about turning lead into gold. That was the metaphor. The real pursuit was the transmutation of the soul, the liberation of spirit from ignorance and stagnation. In the same way, the alchemy of emotions is not about denying sadness or covering wounds with platitudes. It is about discovering the philosopher's stone hidden in the heart of the wound itself. It is to ask, what if your greatest pain is not a punishment, but a portal? We live in a culture where repression is mistaken for resilience, where appearing unaffected is more praised than revealing our vulnerability. But in truth, the wound is where the light enters, as Rumi said, and the one who walks through pain consciously emerges not as a victim, but as a bearer of new codes, wisdom etched into the flesh of their experience. These codes are not found in books or inherited by blood. They are born through fire, through the dark night of the soul, and they alter the shape of a person. To endure is one thing. To transmute is another entirely. And so, this journey is not about avoidance or comfort. It is about entering the sacred furnace of transformation. You will meet the shadows, yours and others. You will face the ancient echoes of abandonment, betrayal, longing, loss. But these shadows are not here to consume you. They are your teachers in disguise. Each emotion, no matter how painful, contains an intelligence, a hidden seed that, if nurtured, grows into empowerment. The fire that scorched you can be the same fire that forges you, if you choose not to run. As we step forward into the deeper waters of this exploration, consider this. Perhaps the universe, in its infinite wisdom, built this emotional architecture not as a glitch in the system, but as the system itself. Perhaps your tears were always meant to be holy water. Perhaps your rage was a compass. And perhaps the moments you thought were breaking, you were the exact moments your soul was being shaped into something luminous. In this unfolding, we will trace the deeper currents beneath our emotional states, uncovering the symbolic, mythic, and practical keys to transmutation. We will not ask emotions to leave us. We will invite them in like ancient guests with stories to tell. We will honor sadness as sacred, anger as sacred, even despair as sacred. And from this sacredness, something new will rise. Not a mask of power, but the embodiment of it. Because to transform pain into power is not a metaphor. It is an act of spiritual physics, where nothing is wasted, and everything, yes, even your deepest heartbreak, is part of your becoming. To delve deeper into the alchemy of emotions is to walk a path that exists in the overlapping spaces between science and spirit, suffering and salvation, breakdown and breakthrough. At its core, this path reveals that emotions are not merely responses to events, but carriers of hidden instruction. They are coded energy fields that carry both the memory of past wounding and the potential for future rebirth. They are the sacred text written on the inner scroll of the soul, and every feeling, especially the most painful, holds within it a fragment of the truth we came to this earth to remember. At the heart of this alchemy lies a paradox. That which we most seek to avoid is often the exact gatekeeper to our transformation. Pain is not the enemy. In fact, it may be the most misunderstood of all sacred guides. Pain arises when something within us that once served us, a belief, a boundary, a role, an identity, can no longer sustain the weight of our evolving truth. It is the friction of expansion pressing against the shell of the familiar. When the soul grows, the structures around it must crack, and it is in these cracks that light enters, sometimes gently, sometimes in floods that dismantle everything we thought we knew. To understand this is to realize that emotions are not simply personal, they are archetypal. Your grief is not just your own. It echoes the grief of generations, the grief of collective loss, the grief of species and stars. Your anger does not exist in isolation. It is tethered to injustices woven into the very fabric of history. When we feel, we open the channel not only to ourselves, but to something vaster, older, more cosmic. In that space, healing becomes less about repair and more about remembrance of our original wholeness, our divine agency, our connection to everything. The first core concept in this emotional alchemy is presence over resistance. To sit with what is, even when it burns, is the entry point into all transformation. It is not about indulging in pain or wallowing. It is about ceasing to run. Most suffering comes not from the emotion itself, but from the endless internal conflict between what is felt and what is allowed. The moment we stop wrestling, a quiet spaciousness enters. We begin to feel the emotion not as a fixed enemy, but as a moving wave, a river with a source and a destination. It passes, it teaches, and it leaves us changed. The second key theme is the idea that emotions, when honored, transmute into awareness. Grief, when witnessed and held, becomes clarity about what truly matters. Fear, when not repressed, becomes insight into where courage must rise. Shame, when unmasked, transforms into authentic humility and connection. This is the great secret the world seldom speaks, that your deepest emotional wounds can become your greatest wells of power, not in spite of the pain, but through it. But to get there, one must move beyond the illusions society constructs around emotion. Chief among these illusions is the belief that mastery means detachment. The Stoic ideal has been warped into a modern myth that strength equals numbness. Yet true strength is not the absence of feeling. It is the capacity to stay open in the presence of overwhelming sensation. It is not the building of walls, but the cultivation of an inner vessel strong enough to hold the storm. Another illusion is the belief in permanence. We are taught to fear sorrow as if it will never end, to cling to joy as if it is fleeting. But emotional states are weather systems, vast, mysterious, and in constant motion. To practice alchemy is to understand this impermanence, not intellectually, but viscerally, in the body, in the breath. You learn that no feeling defines you. You are the sky, not the clouds. You are the flame, not the flicker. Closely tied to these themes is the notion of integration. We are not meant to bypass emotion in pursuit of transcendence. Emotional alchemy is not escapism. It is embodiment. It is taking the high truths of spirit and anchoring them in the blood and bone of human experience. The divine is not only found in the blissful light, but in the aching dark. To transmute pain into power is to dig the well of your humanity so deep that divinity can pour in freely. This leads to another essential concept: emotional sovereignty. This is not the idea that we control our emotions, but that we own our relationship with them. Emotional sovereignty means we are no longer at the mercy of our past, nor bound to react from old patterns. We become the alchemists of our own field, capable of holding anger without destruction, sadness without despair, joy without addiction. We listen, feel, respond, not from unconscious reflex, but from conscious presence. And finally, emotional alchemy invites us into the sacred cycle of death and rebirth. Every emotional wave, no matter how fierce, carries us through a mini-death. The death of a belief, a dream, a persona. If we allow the process, what rises from the ashes is not just healing, it is transformation. The pain does not vanish, it transmutes. What once made you collapse now makes you rise. What once silenced you now becomes your voice. This is the gold hidden in the lead, the phoenix in the fire, the soul beneath the scar. The alchemy of emotions is not a linear process. It is not something to be mastered and then forgotten. It is a rhythm, a sacred pulse, an ever-turning spiral. As long as we live, we will feel. As long as we feel, we are offered the choice to evolve. If emotions are the sacred elements of the inner world, then symbolic narratives are the myths that give those elements shape. They are the metaphoric architectures of our transformation, the hidden blueprints that guide us not only to feel, but to interpret, to decode the deeper purpose behind the storm. For centuries, the great traditions did not speak of emotions in clinical language. They wrapped them in stories. They whispered them through archetypes. They painted their wisdom into parables, so that we might remember, not just with the mind, but with the soul. Let us begin with the story of the phoenix, the eternal firebird who burns in its own flames only to rise again from its ashes. This is no mere fable of renewal. It is a mirror of emotional alchemy. Every time we allow ourselves to fully enter the grief, the rage, the sorrow, we are enacting this sacred rite of combustion. The ego burns, the false identity crumbles, the beliefs that can no longer contain the truth are reduced to dust. It is terrifying. It is liberating. In the ash lies the seed of the next version of self, not stronger in the old sense, but deeper, truer, forged. This is the story of every soul who has chosen to meet their pain with presence instead of resistance. They do not return from the fire unchanged. They return glowing. In another realm, we meet the myth of Inanna, the ancient Sumerian goddess of love and war, who descends into the underworld not for conquest, but for initiation. She removes her royal garments at each gate she passes, stripping layer after layer of identity until she stands naked before the queen of the dead. She is killed there, not physically, but symbolically. And it is only after her lifeless body is hung on a hook for 3 days that resurrection comes. This myth is a profound teaching on emotional descent. Pain often demands that we relinquish our masks, our pride, our illusions. Grief, especially, takes everything that was once held as sacred and asks, what remains when all else falls away? The descent is frightening because it feels like death, but in truth, it is the womb of rebirth. The soul returns clothed in wisdom, carrying gifts not earned through ease, but through surrender. We see this pattern again in the tale of the wounded healer, Chiron, the centaur of Greek mythology. Struck by a wound that could never be healed, Chiron spends his life learning the medicinal arts, eventually becoming the greatest healer of his time. Yet he can never cure his own wound. This paradox is at the heart of emotional alchemy, that the wound we carry may never fully disappear in the way we desire, but it can become a source of profound power. The pain does not define us, but it refines us. From it, we draw empathy, compassion, clarity. We become bridges for others, not because we are unbroken, but because we have learned how to walk through the breakage without losing the thread of light. In alchemical language, this process is known as solve et coagula, to dissolve and to bind. First, the ego must dissolve, the illusions must scatter, the emotional armor must melt. This is the dismemberment, the storm. But after the storm, the soul begins to reassemble. Something stronger than the sum of its parts emerges. This is not regression or regression therapy. It is soul architecture. Each emotional ordeal becomes a glyph etched into the stone of your being. The body remembers. The heart reopens. The spirit sharpens. Even the natural world mirrors this code. Think of the caterpillar, which enters the chrysalis not simply to sprout wings, but to dissolve entirely. Its very body becomes a liquid chaos before reforming into the butterfly. And what stirs this process? Hormonal surges, pressure, time. In a word, transformation by destruction. Nature does not fear this process. It depends on it. So, Why do we? Because the human psyche is often terrified of the unknown. We grip familiar pain rather than risk the chaos of release. But in the language of symbolic alchemy, chaos is not the enemy. It is the crucible, the boiling stage, the sacred disorientation before reformation. Emotional chaos is a cosmic signal that something false is dying and something real is asking to be born. There is a lesser-known Zen parable about a monk who, while walking through the mountains, stumbles upon a tiger. He turns to run and finds himself on the edge of a cliff. Below, a sheer drop. Above, death. He leaps and clings to a vine growing from the cliff face. As he hangs there, a mouse begins to nibble the vine. Death is coming, above and below. But then the monk sees a wild strawberry growing just within reach. He plucks it. He eats it. And in that moment, the story says, he tastes the sweetness of life more deeply than ever before. This, too, is emotional alchemy. To be suspended in the tension between fear and surrender, and still choose to taste life. Still choose to feel. Still choose to find beauty in the burning. Emotions are the strawberries on the cliffside, bittersweet, fleeting, and sacred. To feel them fully is not to lose control. It is to reclaim it. In every tradition, there is a serpent, a symbol both feared and revered. The serpent sheds its skin not once, but many times in a life. Each time it rubs against the rocks, uncomfortable and raw. But it does this because it has outgrown its former self. Emotional pain often signals a similar shedding. Not a punishment, but an upgrade. A signal that your inner architecture has grown too large for the skin you once wore. The suffering is not the end, it is the friction of emergence. In this way, emotional alchemy is not a technique. It is an initiation, a sacred journey through myths both ancient and personal. And like all initiations, it asks something in return. It asks for honesty. It asks for surrender. And above all, it asks for the willingness to see your suffering not as a defect but as a doorway, so far we have wandered through the sacred myths, the hidden codes, the archetypal echoes that reverberate beneath the emotional body. But what of the marketplace, the kitchen table, the crowded street, the late-night conversation with yourself in a dim-lit mirror? The true power of emotional alchemy is not confined to the scrolls of ancient wisdom or the spirals of cosmic narrative. It must take form in the body, in breath, in the trembling decisions made in the raw, unfiltered present. Without integration, philosophy is hollow. Without embodiment, even the purest insight withers like mist in the sun. Emotional alchemy, then, is a living practice, a discipline of awareness, of radical honesty, and of courageous presence. It begins not in temples, but in traffic, in arguments, in sudden grief that arrives uninvited on a Thursday morning. It is in the moment when someone disappoints you and you feel that familiar surge of anger rising. Do you push it down? Do you lash out? Or do you pause, breathe, and listen? Not to the mind's quick judgments, but to the feeling beneath. Do you allow the heat to speak without burning everything around you? This is the laboratory of real life. Every moment we react is an opportunity to transmute. Every time we notice an emotion as it arises and choose curiosity over control, we activate the alchemist within. It is not about perfection. It is about awareness, about replacing unconscious loops with conscious engagement. Anger, for example, often masks a wound of betrayal, a boundary crossed, a need ignored. When met with silence and compassion, it reveals its root. And in that unveiling, it softens, not to weakness, but to truth. That truth then becomes a guidepost rather than a grenade. Grief, too, is not something to get over, but to walk beside. It carries with it memories, echoes, fragments of what once was. The world may expect you to rush, to return to normal, to smile again on cue. But emotional alchemy honors the tempo of the soul, which does not move on demand. To grieve consciously is to stay in dialogue with love in its most raw, aching form. To cry without shame. To remember without collapsing. To let the waves wash through you and shape your inner shores anew. In day-to-day life, these practices begin with small, sacred rituals of presence. A pause before the reply. A breath before the reaction. A moment alone to name what is arising without judgment. This is not indulgence, it is intelligence. Emotional intelligence is not just about managing others. It begins with reverence for your own experience. To sit in discomfort, not as a punishment, but as a form of soul listening. Each time you do this, you rewire something ancient. You tell the nervous system, it is safe to feel. It is safe to be here. We are not dying. We are becoming. The implications ripple outward. Relationships shift. Not because you force them to, but because you change the energy you bring into them. Instead of blame, you offer clarity. Instead of reactivity, response. Emotional alchemy fosters emotional responsibility, not in the sense of carrying burdens that aren't yours, but in owning what is truly yours without projecting it outward like shrapnel. You begin to recognize your triggers as invitations. The world becomes less threatening because you no longer fear your own depth. You can go to the root, sit in the fire, and emerge intact. In the workplace, emotional alchemy becomes a quiet revolution. It means not suppressing the fatigue or disillusionment that creeps in, but using it as a signal. What needs to change? Where are you out of alignment? Instead of numbing with distraction or performance, you begin to make micro-adjustments toward truth, toward values, toward a life that reflects your inner clarity rather than betrays it. Burnout is not just about workload. It is about soul depletion, about too many days spent wearing masks and silencing inner truth. Alchemy brings the soul back into the equation. Even in parenting, this work transforms everything. When a child cries, do you meet them with discomfort or with presence? Do you teach them that feelings are problems or portals? A parent who has done their own emotional alchemy offers the child something far greater than advice. They offer permission to be whole, to be messy, to feel deeply and still be loved. Generational healing begins here, in the quiet modeling of inner work made visible through everyday grace. On a societal level, Emotional alchemy offers a potent antidote to division. Most of what we see as conflict is pain unprocessed, fear unloved, grief unacknowledged. When a population is taught to fear emotion, repression becomes policy, and that repression breeds violence in subtle or overt forms. But when enough individuals begin the inner work of transmutation, the collective begins to shift. Conversations deepen, systems evolve. The culture itself becomes more humane, not through legislation alone, but through lived empathy. In spiritual practice, too, alchemy grounds what might otherwise remain abstract. Meditation becomes more than escape. It becomes integration. Prayer becomes less about pleading for release and more about making space for guidance to emerge from within. The sacred and the psychological begin to dance together. Instead of bypassing pain in search of enlightenment, the alchemist sees pain as the very fuel of awakening. None of this is instant. It is not meant to be. Alchemy is slow, sacred, and cyclical. There will be relapses, days when the old reactions return, when numbness feels safer than presence. But even then, you are not back at the beginning. You are circling deeper into the spiral, refining your awareness, learning what it means to hold complexity with grace. So yes, emotional alchemy is poetic, cosmic, mythic, but it is also profoundly practical. It is in how you speak to yourself when no one else is listening. It is in how you recover after being hurt. It is in whether you reach for your phone to escape a feeling, or whether you close your eyes and breathe through it instead. Over time, these choices reshape everything. This is what it means to transform pain into power, not power over others, but power within. The kind of power that needs no applause, because it is rooted in truth. The kind that no longer fears the dark, because it carries its own light. And now, we arrive at the edge of the forge, where embers glow in the quiet hush after fire. We have wandered through myth and metaphor, through wounds and weathered truths, through the slow-turning wheel of inner transmutation. But what remains when the language settles and the metaphors dim? What lingers when the story has been told and the silence returns? That, perhaps, is where the real alchemy begins. Not in the brilliance of the insight, but in the stillness that follows it. Emotional alchemy is not a doctrine. It is not a destination. It is a way of being, of relating to your inner world with such sincerity that even your pain starts to loosen its grip. It is the practice of turning inward not to escape, but to meet the sacred mess that lives beneath your skin. It is not linear. There is no final arrival. Rather, there is a constant deepening into yourself, into your patterns, into the mystery of what it means to be a soul experiencing humanity in all its fractured brilliance. The transformation of pain into power does not always feel like a thunderclap or a firework. Sometimes it is a quiet turning, a decision not to run, a breath taken in the middle of what used to unravel you. A soft whisper to yourself, I can be with this. And in that moment, something ancient shifts. A thread once severed is tied again. A fragment of the self exiled long ago is welcomed home. This is how power grows. Not the brittle kind that performs strength, but the subterranean kind that cannot be shaken, because it was born in the depths. Power that remembers how you cried in silence and got up anyway. Power that knows your fear but walks forward just the same. Power that doesn't dominate but anchors, doesn't control but illuminates. In truth, you have always had access to this power. The emotions you feared, the wounds you buried, the chaos you tried to escape, they were never punishments. They were invitations. Portals. Sacred fires calling you inward so that something unshakable could be born from the ash. The world may never tell you this because the world profits from your disconnection. But your soul knows, and your body remembers. So now, what will you do with this knowing? Will you return to your life and ignore the tremors of awakening that have begun to stir in your chest? Will you retreat into old patterns, safe but silent? Or will you rise, not in rebellion, but in remembering? Will you honor the emotional landscape within you as holy terrain, a place where power is not seized but unearthed, slowly, through love, through honesty, through fire? You are not here to be emotionally perfect. You are here to be emotionally present, to hold the storms, to feel the ache and choose connection anyway, to weep, to rage, to rejoice, and know that every note in your emotional symphony is divine. There is no hierarchy of feeling here, only energy, waiting to move, waiting to teach, waiting to heal. And healing is not a final state. It is a rhythm, a dance between shadow and sun. Some days you will fall, some days you will rise. But even the fall becomes sacred when you no longer shame it. The spiral deepens, the forge burns on, and you, alchemist of your own soul, become a vessel for the sacred transmutation that all of life is calling for. Let the world burn away what is false. Let the fire consume the masks. Let the grief speak. Let the anger pulse. Let the joy rise. Let the silence teach. Trust that in every feeling a truth is being shaped. Trust that in every wound a new wisdom is coiled, waiting. Trust that nothing is wasted, not one tear, not one scream, not one solitary moment of despair. This is your work. This is your power. This is your invitation. To transmute is to trust. To feel is to awaken. To stay is to evolve. Now go. Not as someone who has been fixed, but as someone who has been forged. You are the alchemist. The elements are within you, and the fire is no longer something to fear. It is something you carry.